If you're 19, 20, 21, this episode is for you. I recently had a webinar attendee ask some questions that were indicative of someone who's just starting out, which is typical in the webinar because that's who it's for. But these questions were specific to someone who's much younger because their focus was not in the right place. Let me explain. So their first question was, how do you get from an entry-level animator to senior to a lead animator is what they're asking. It's the wrong question to ask because they are focused at for them, what's the end goal, which they're not even clear if that's the end goal that they want to have. Because the reality is people sometimes don't want to be leads even when they're offered the job, because that's a different kind of job than being a senior, for example. But you don't even know to ask that question because you don't have that information, which is understandable. So what I tend to tell people who are just starting out, and especially the younger people who are maybe focused on the prestige or the seniority as soon as they get started, I tell them to focus on the first step. I told this who was 19-year-old to just see if they like animation. They may not even like it. They haven't even started animating. And so what I would recommend to people who have not started animating is just to get started. Don't worry about the end goal because you might even have the wrong target. In this case, 10 years down the road, you might not even want to be a lead animator because you want to keep animating as a senior and not have the kind of more managerial or organizational responsibilities that come along with the lead position. So it's the wrong question for those reasons and a few more, but that's essentially what it boils down to. And when you're starting out, it's easy to compare yourself. The next thing this person said was, I'm 19 and just starting. How could I catch up to people who started when they were 10? Now, I hope they were just saying 10 years old for exaggeration to make their point. But what I responded with was, don't worry about that. You're way too young to be worried about being behind. I didn't start till I was 26 years old. If you start playing that game, you'll never stop. A 10-year-old thinking, how do I get ahead of someone who started when they're 8 years old, for example? Just focus on your own journey. You're at an age you need to figure out what you like doing first. And that goes back to my original point of just start animating. Get familiar with it, see if you even like it. What you might realize is you're in the ballpark. You like 3D. Maybe you don't like animating specifically. Maybe you realize you like setting up the environments for your animation more than the animation itself, but you would never discover that unless you started animating. So you want to get in the ballpark of your interest. You don't necessarily have to have your whole career trajectory mapped out from entry level to senior to lead to CEO of a studio before you even take the first step. You need to take the first step along the journey to see if it's even the right path for you. If you wanted to chat with me one-on-one like this 19-year-old did, then you could register for the webinar, and I'm live in the chat in the webinar whenever you register for that and join. So that's always an option to discover the career path that it takes to become a 3D animator, as well as getting my feedback on your specific situation and questions. Visit animatorsjourney.com to register for the webinar. So let's take a step back. Let's take the question because I just finished up a lead position. And so I've done the whole journey from entry level to, mid to senior to lead. And the unfulfilling answer to this question, how do you get from entry level to a lead, for example, is it's different for every studio. So there's no one answer. The answer is it depends. And it depends on the studio you're at, which is going to change. You're going to probably end up working at a bunch of different places. It's fairly rare these days to secure a long-term contract, especially for someone who is entry level. They tend to have the shorter contracts and need to bounce around a little bit more at the beginning of a career. That's not to say it's impossible, it's just not as common. So it kind of is like playing hot potato or musical chairs. When music stops and you're trying to become a senior or lead, it kind of depends on where you're at and how they operate. So it depends on that, really. And if you're in games or visual effects or feature, for example, in games, you have an entire role that doesn't exist in visual effects or feature animation, and that is of a principal animator. At least I don't know of any visual effects or feature animation studios that have this role. In games, the principal animator role is at the same level skill-wise as a lead. They just don't want the managerial organizational responsibilities. So they want the kind of identity as, not even to say they want it, but they're recognized as having that skill level, but also, that they don't have to get pushed into this management kind of position in leading a team, which takes its own skill set, which doesn't necessarily relate to being a good animator. The best leads don't necessarily mean they're the best animator on the team or at the studio. They hopefully have been identified as being, somewhat of a leader in their team or having the capabilities to become one, and they're being given the chance. I have obviously been a part of teams, or I've seen teams where someone is a lead just because of their skill level and not because of their soft skills. And it's usually pretty obvious sometimes. And unfortunately, some places don't make that distinction, that just because you're a good animator doesn't necessarily mean you're going to make a good lead or even supervisor for that matter. In my opinion, being a lead takes its own skill set. And I read books, every other month probably on leadership, just out of curiosity for, my curiosity in social sciences and psychology to understand how leadership works. And so on the side, I'm doing that kind of reading. So it's not just something I think that you can or should be stumbling into just because so many years have passed in your job or profession, and that you have become good at a specific skill doesn't necessarily correlate to becoming a good leader. Now, I'm sure there's people who disagree with me, and that's fine, but that's my opinion and my experience. And that's what this podcast is all about, because it's just me here. So hopefully you can take all that with a grain of salt, but that's my opinion, having been an entry level to a mid, to a senior, to a lead. That's what I believe and what I've experienced. So I hope this week's Animator's Journey podcast episode has been informative for you. Please like, comment, share, all that kind of good stuff, so more people can learn from this information. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever, try to give a review as well. It helps the podcast gain a broader audience so that this can help more people. As always, if you want to get started on your animator's journey, I have a beginner course that has unlimited feedback, which no one does. You can get as much feedback as it takes to reach the quality you need, which no school does this. It's because it is very involved, and no one wants to provide that level of support. And to my knowledge, Animator's Journey for Beginners is the only course online or anywhere in person online that does this. So if you want to have the most support available to you as someone just starting their journey, which I think is really the most important part of someone's journey is when they're starting out, then consider enrolling in Animator's Journey Beginner. It has rolling enrollment, and I'm here to answer any questions you may have about it. Thanks for listening, and best of luck on your animation journey.